Hello chess friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel. So in this video, we're going to have a look at a historical chess encounter between Robert James Fischer and Tigran Petrosian. This was played in the famous 1970 USSR versus the rest of the world. So it is basically show of power. You know, the USSR team had a field of world champions: Tal, Petrosian, Botvinnik, Smyslov. You just name them, right? There were a range of strong players. So this is a very interesting encounter, and after a very long time, because in 1962 Fischer nearly semi-retired from the chess world, and yeah, and basically after that he spent a lot of years just training himself. Actually, he was doing was he was really finding out the weaknesses in his play, and he was fixing them. For example, it is said, I think Lombardi said it, that during this period from 1962 and 1967, during this period he went through hundreds and hundreds of books, old books, and he revived many openings. And at this point he during this time he was also experimenting with d4 and c4 in some games, right? So it was not the world championship where he first played d4 or c4. He had played these ideas before. He had also played the Nimzo Larsen at some point in the same during the same period of time, right, in 1970 or something. So he was already experimenting and widening his opening repertoire. He was fixing his opening problems. But obviously, in this game, we saw classic Fischer starting the game off with pawn to e4, king to pawn 4, pawn to king 4. Pardon me for that. Pawn to king 4, basically, best by this, as said by Fischer himself. It's the most sharp. The territories that we reach are very, very sharp, right? Petrosian goes for Caro-Kann defense. This is one of his favorite, obviously. D4. Fischer is a classical player. He'll always go for the most standard line. Now we have D5. Captures. Okay, that's not very standard, although. But okay, he prefers this kind of exchange variations where he can just outplay his opponents. He's very similar to Magnus Carlsen in this style. Give him a slight advantage, and he'll do very well with it. So bishop on D3 excellently controls this diagonal. At the same time, stops the black's bishop to come out here, right? So one of the reasons you play the Caro-Kann is to develop your bad bishop out of the pawn chain. And for now, at least, bishop f5 has been stopped. Knight to c6. We have c3. Strong move, protecting this, stopping knight b4, although that was never a threat still. Now we have knight f6. Bishop f4. Again, a very strong move. White has developed both of his bishops on very, very good move, right? And black would very much like to challenge them, specifically the bishop on d3. It's quite strong, specifically because of the pawn structure being on dark squares, right? It's a simple strategy. Bishop to g4, played by black. Now we have queen b3. This is very typical of Fischer now. Just look at it. Knight a5. Now instead of retreating back to c2, which he can simply do, he first goes queen to a4. A typical Fischer move, right? He used to play this intermediate move all the time. All throughout his career, you'll see this kind of intermediate moves, and it's quite a useful move indeed. You're asking him, are you going to go back with knight? You definitely cannot play queen d7 because then I'll just capture a knight for free. So you don't have much options. You either play knight fd7, you play knight a d7, ac6, or you play bishop to d7, and you just have to retreat, right? All of these moves are somewhat uncomfortable for you. So black decides to play bishop to d7. Now we have queen to c2. If anyone has achieved anything, it's definitely white, because you wasted time bringing the bishop here and then back on d7. And all I did was just put the queen on c2 in a way, right? So basically, this is gain of time. We have e6, knight to f3, queen to b6. What's the point of this move? It's a very interesting positional move, typical of Petrosian, obviously. Let's understand what does this move do. For that, you need to understand the pawn structure. Black's pawn structure is placed on the light squares, which means the dark square bishop is going to be the good bishop, and this is going to be the problem piece, right? If you want to exchange it, if you exchange it successfully, you're done with the opening problems. You have a good position in the middle game. So you would very much like to play bishop to b5 and exchange the good bishop for white. As you can see in this case, it's the bishop on d3. In the close kind of positions like the French and the Caro-Kann, it's obviously this bishop on the light square bishop that's actually very effective and powerful. The main reason for that is the pawn structure. Most of your pawns are placed on the dark squares, and that's why this bishop is way more powerful and also more important. Imagine the bishop on d3 not being there, and suddenly all the light squares are weak. c4 is weak, e4 is weak, right? All the squares will be left weak. That's why with the queen to b6 move, black very much want to exchange the transfer of bishop with bishop to b5. A very logical positional idea. Now there are two ways of stopping it. One is the way to go queen e2, a very interesting and known way, right? This is something that you can do, a very logical move to do. But if you know Fischer and if you know how he plays the French and Caro-Kann positions, you'll understand his move. He plays pawn to a4. Typical Fischer. This is not the first time he's played this move. In fact, if you study his win-over games in the French, you'll see that he has constantly used the pawn to a4 move. The reasons were different, obviously. He used to put his bishop on the a3 square, controlling the diagonal. This time he does not have the same option, and he's not going for it anyway if he had. But the point is, just stop bishop to b5 and many other expansion ideas by black. Now goes rook to c8, knight b to d2, strong move by white, knight to c6. Now, every time your opponent makes a move, you need to ask yourself, what is the threat? This move comes with a threat, and a very strong one indeed. The threat is to play knight to b5, knight to b4. Because of the newly created pin, thanks to the rook here, the pawn on c3 is pinned, and that's why there'll be a double attack on the queen and the bishop. And that will be very annoying because then you will get rid of your, then you'll just lose the light square bishop, which is so important for this position. Because then without that bishop and your pawns being on dark squares, your light squares will become really weak. So you don't want to do that. At the same time, black will get the bishop pair, which in the end game or in the later middle game can be a very potent force. That's why white plays a very logical move, bishop to b1. Right. So we are still looking at here over the diagonal. Our objective is very clear. At some point, black will like to castle, and then the h7 pawn will become a target, right? So we're still very stable. Knight to h5, attacking the bishop. Any other player would consider the moves like bishop g5, but not Fischer. He's typical Fischer. He loves the bishop pair. He puts his bishop on e3, preserving his bishops. Now h6 is being played. Also possible was to play g6 here. Although this too creates weaknesses, it blunts the strongest, most active piece for white, the bishop. But it also creates some weaknesses, right? You can see this squares can become a problem, specifically against a player like Fischer. He would very much like to attack those weakened squares, right? Typical dark square weaknesses. So that would have been other option, but h6 is what Petrosian plays. He has a different idea behind it, as you'll see. Knight to e5 played. Now what's the point? Can't you just take it? Actually, you cannot, because after this, the bishop has been unleashed. The pawn on e5 is actually very well placed, and it serves very well. It's a spearhead, and it comes with a very direct threat. You have to move the queen, and next g4 will come, trapping the knight. Right, so it's a very strong move. You cannot really capture the knight. So after knight e5, there was knight f6. Black just says, okay, there's no point in knight being on h5, so let me just retreat to f6. It's a logical move. h3, bishop to d6, and now comes castles. King to f8. What would you say of this move? Well, it's not the first time that Petrosian has played this. I think this was, he tried it against Pomar and Unzicker as well. So he has played this idea of king f8 earlier with the pawn being on h6. It's a strong idea. It's an interesting idea actually. It's a patent move for Petrosian, and I think in any other case this would have worked. But against Fischer, he just senses blood over here. You're placing the king directly against the rook on f1, which screams for the idea of f4. I mean, white anyway wants to play this because there is a hook on e6, right? You anyway want to play f4 followed by f5. But with the king being on f8, this is just screaming for it, right? So bishop to e8. I think it's very much about style. Stylistically, Fischer feels very comfortable in this position. He's the one who's attacking. He's the one with the initiative. He has very clear goals. I can see that this is weak. It's a target. I want to open up my f file. I want to reroute my bishop and knight on the other side, like bishop f2, knight f3. Very simple plans for me. Meanwhile, what are you doing? Right? So very clear cut, strategically clear cut game. And this is exactly the type of position that Fischer excelled in. Bishop f2. You can see that the bishop was not being guarded, and that's why there was a threat of capturing here, double capture, because the bishop was hanging, but now that has been solved. In fact, I think this move can also qualify for the how to think like a grandmaster, because he's not only retreating the bishop to f2, he's actually planning to improve it. He wants to put it on h4, and suddenly the bad bishop will turn into a very strong bishop, and there can be some ideas of capturing the knight as well, right, at some point. So very strong positional idea, rerouting the bishop, rearranging the pieces in a way that they are better placed in a uh, in the moves forward. Queen c7, we have bishop h4. Fischer achieved what he wanted. If you look at the games of Fischer or Magnus Carlsen or Karpov, you'll always notice this thing. Somehow they always have the pieces on the best squares. Somehow that's always the case. The bishop is beautifully placed here. This bishop, which was not so good on e3, is now an excellent piece over here. Knight is great. Rook on f1 is ready to attack. This is just an ideal position. And this is something you also see in the games of Karpov or Magnus Carlsen. Somehow they always place their piece on the best square possible. They just happen to be there. I don't know how. Now, knight d7 here is a playable move. But I think this was the crux. Knight g8 was played by black. And although this is a defensively good move, this actually invites a lot of problems. So, what is the weakness of the last move? The weakening of the f file. Without the knight on f6, the f file has become more weak, and that's why the move is screaming. Pawn to f5. You want to open up, right? Open the blinds against the king. Knight e5, d5. Black wins a pawn. White gets it back because of the pin here. So its situation is getting tougher, and you can see there is zero coordination between the black pieces, right? Bishop is undeveloped, knight is undeveloped. This rook has never even seen daylight. He doesn't know that the chess game is going on. He's just unaware. Yeah. So this is a horrible position. Meanwhile, look at Fischer's bishops. They're very, very strong bishops, right? Typical Fischer. Again, he was known as the king of bishops. This is exactly the reason why. Bishop f6, trying to exchange pieces. First capture on f7, intermediate move, typical of Fischer, right? Bishop takes f7. And now black is saying, do you want to exchange the bishops? White says yes, but it's not going to happen on your terms. It's going to happen on my terms. So I'll play knight to f3. Because now when you capture, I'll capture back. And what has changed? My knight was 2 moves ago, my knight was on d2. But now thanks to you, my knight has been actively placed on h4, and I have some really good ideas. I can actually go to f5 square. Pardon me for that. Just a second. I can actually go to the f5 square, which is a very strong square for the knight, usually, generally speaking. Also, knight g6 is a strong move thanks to the pin here, right? You can see there's a pin. The bishop cannot move. So very, very strong position. In fact, black is in a big trouble here. Petrosian tries to defend. Knight to f6, closing the pin. But knight to g6. Again, very straightforward chess by Fischer. He puts his pieces on the best squares possible, and then he goes for the king. Very straightforward. Strategically, very, very clear cut. Bishop takes g6. Bishop takes g6, and whose squares have become weak? Let's evaluate it a little bit. These squares are definitely toast. They are going to be a big problem for black. Knight on f6 is pinned. I don't know where your king is going to run, because I don't see a safe square for him either ways. Rook on h8. He just doesn't know that the chess game is going on. He's never seen the daylight. He's just out of the game. Yeah, completely cut off. And what is the rook on c8 doing? Because the pawn on c3 is very well guarded. I don't know what's the point of that. So you can see black has several problems here. In fact, Fischer just said that at this point he was expecting a resignation from Petrosian. That's how bad this position is. Even if you turn on the engine, it will say, I don't know, +3, +4 something. It's very, very good position for white. Main reason is quite clear. Queen is going to come to f5. Rook is going to come to e1. And I don't know how black will continue, but that's going to be very, very tough. If the pin is here, you're playing virtually a rook down, because this rook is not going to be in the game very quickly. So basically, Fischer was right. He said, I was expecting a resignation here, but Petrosian finds a very resourceful idea. King to e7. The king is basically trying to run away, find a safe square. Maybe somewhere around here, somehow. Maybe he wants to go to the b8. That's a dream square. He'll suddenly be very safe. Obviously, Fischer won't let that happen. Queen to f5 first. The queen jumps in the action. attacking the softened up light squares and also inviting the rook to come on e1 square. King to d8, the king is trying to run away. Rook a to e1, the last piece of white joins in. All the pieces are beautifully coordinated, beautiful harmony between all the pieces. Queen c5, king h1. The king on h1 is very safe. There's no way you can harass it further. Rook f8. Finally, the rook realizes, oh, I need to be a part of this game as well. But now queen e5, and this move just paralyzes black. In fact, the queen is the only thing that is like a thread. The queen is the only thing that's stopping, somehow controlling the game. Because if you take away the queen, queen e7 is a mate, queen d6 is a big threat. This is just lost, and obviously b4 is coming now. It's a very basic beginner-like deflection tactic. Rook c7 played by black. He's trying to hold b4. The technical part is not tough for Fischer. Okay, he's a class. He's a class act when it comes to the technical part. Queen c6. Move is simple. You want to run away from towards this side? I'll not let you do that. I'll play pawn to c4, trying to open it up. Can you capture this? Obviously, you cannot. There are big threats looming in the position, so pawn takes pawn is necessary. And now, before you give a check, Fischer plays this intermediate move, bishop to f5. Again, typical Fischer constantly makes this excellent intermediate moves, and again, black is not having a breathing space here. Rook f to f7, rook to d1. Black's option is forced as he cannot run out. He has been surrounded from all the sides. हमने तुम्हें चारों तरफ से घेर लिया है, kind of stuff. Knight cannot block here, by the way, because of the move rook f to e1. As the knight is pinned, there is a big threat coming here, or on e7. Let's say if you go back with rook f8, I'm just going to play this. I'm going to win completely, or even let us say you try to play something like rook c8. Just check, picking up the rook, and there are a million attackers on the d7, pardon me, d7 square. This is just lost, there's no doubt. And that's why you're forced to play rook to d7, give up the exchange, there's no other way to continue. I'll just take, now you're forced to capture. You can't take with the queen, obviously, as long as you don't want to lose the queen. You have to take with the rook. What happens if you take with the knight? This is for half a point because it's so simple. Rook to f8 is just a checkmate, right? So you can't go for that. You have to go for rook takes on d7. Now Fischer plays queen b8 check again. Now it's very simple for him. You're winning, just exchanges. You just wanted some exchanges and you're just winning, right? Knight versus rook, completely winning, completely open position. So he just wants to exchange some pieces now. King tries to run out, but now rook d to e1. King goes here, and in fact, this is where Petrosian just resigns. Can you see the next move? I'll be surprised if you're not. You're all very strong players. Queen e8 is just a checkmate, and the knight is pinned. Throughout the game, the knight was pinned. Even when the king ran out here, somehow he just comes back, and he's again the knight is still pinned. So excellent game, positional genius, positional masterpiece by Fischer. I think there are some key highlights to study from the game. Let me just show you the first one. This one over here. Realizing that the bishop on e3 is not doing much, this little moves are very important, guys. Remember, these are the moves that actually contribute to the position a lot. Bishop f2 and bishop h4, the biggest thing. And then the straightforward plan with f5 was just too strong, right? And here, this idea of playing knight g6, a very strong move indeed, because once you get rid of the, either you have to give up the exchange now, I'll just take the rook and I'm winning anyway, or you have to give up the bishop, and this is positionally busted because this squares are too weak, right? There's no way you can save this. You can save it for a few moves at best, but not more than that, right? Because queen f5 is coming, rook is coming in the game, and this is too difficult with the kind of coordination you're having. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Petrosian would have been disgusted by this game because he's a positional genius as well. He loves to play positions. This is not his. This is not one of his best games at all. Like, this is really terrible for him. So this was the first game between Petrosian and Fischer in this USSR versus uh, rest of the world match. Yeah, so this was a very interesting encounter. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and I'll bring you more chess encounters, chess classics. So until next time, bye guys.